OG Rose, and today we're going to be talking about belonging again. II.1. We're going to be in Book 1, Chapter 3, Section 2A. And we've already talked about childhood, Simone Weil, the idea of neurodiversity as being important for avoiding Nash equilibria, various game theory problems that you see, and how really when we're talking about a lot of the different, being captured by capital or AI or different things, we really need to think in terms of moving into neurodiversity. Or menti-diversity, as we talk about, because simply becoming more intelligent or smarter will not necessarily help us move beyond game theory problems. We need to think in different modes of thinking, different ways of thinking, different horizons and hermeneutics of understanding, not merely greater rationality or intelligence. But then, of course, there's the question of how do you spread the conditions of that. And we talked also about the essential limits of pluralism. If you understand that mind entails certain essential limits, then it becomes rational for mind to integrate with those limits, not to ignore them. But if you don't know about those limits, then it can be rational to fight them forever, if you will. And this point brings Hegel to mind, and integrating with limit. As there's an odd way in which unlimited rationality is weaker than limited reason. Limited reason doesn't have to be at the mercy of dynamics that lead it somewhere it doesn't want to go, as we've described with Nash equilibria and Kafka and different things like that. Today, the section is called Preparing Attention Before the Lacking and Visible to Avoid Afflicting Plans of the Visible. And attention, we have a Simone Weil reference in mind there, and we can thank Dr. McGilchrist or Ivan Illich as well. And we'll be reading from section 3.2a, chapter 3.2a of book 1. It has been mentioned that we cannot avoid maps and internally consistent systems, which means the threat of rational impasses is everywhere. Affliction is discourse, and its nature brings to mind something Joseph Heller wrote. Catch-22 did not exist. He was positive of that, but it made no difference. What did matter was that everyone thought it existed, and that was much worse, for there was no object or text to ridicule or refute, to accuse, criticize, attack, amend, hate, revile, spit at, rip to shreds, trample upon, or burn up. Spiritual warfare is the topic which emerges throughout Christianity. We might think of the battle between affliction and attention, or discourse and rhetoric, as this book will discuss, in those terms. Spiritual warfare is strange, though, for how do we plan for it? And where is it? It seems invisible. How do we plan for the invisible? It would seem we can only plan for the low-order visible, and if we are naturally and typically oriented toward the visible, this would mean we are biased to plan at the expense of the invisible, for which we can only prepare with no guarantees. We must always be on guard and prepared, which will be notably difficult in a world that honors planning over preparing, as we'll discuss. And at the same time, we must be oriented towards something unclear and lacking. The term lack, mystery, the apophatic, these come up throughout O.G. Rose, and their centrality is hopefully clear. To touch on the topic, which I will elaborate on further when I discuss the nihilism of Stanley Rosen, as Guy Sinstock brought to my attention, we will note here that the work today needs to seek common paradox more than seek a common ground, though this is difficult given the emotional and existential conditioning it requires. This has already been discussed, and the notion has political and socio-economic ramifications and could help us describe a world in which democracy was more menti-divergent than neurotypical. The main point is that though we cannot shift the towardness of a society unless we sift the truth on which the society is founded and organized, but that will in turn shift how the society's rationality is organized, as described in Truth Organizes Values, which is the opening essay of The Conflict of Mind. We have attempted to begin that movement by first showing how rationality is essentially limited, which then in O.G. Rose has led to us positing an incomplete ontoepistemology, which has implications for fields like sociology, politics, and economics. If Lacan is right that desire is ultimately lacking, This should have significant ramifications for society, though it might not if we are stuck under affliction and discourse, AA. We must think we need to change to change. An affliction with our frenemy brains makes that thought difficult to entertain. As we will later discuss, if first world nations tend to fall into affliction and discourse, which is to say they slip from high order thinking to low order thinking, perhaps because material wealth removes the incentive to see beyond what's in front of us. After all, what's in front of us is nice, enjoyable, and makes us comfortable, and or because we always have a technology, service, and or good at hand which can solve our problems, as Illich discusses, and why would we want to see beyond our problem solver? Then perhaps this sheds light on why first world nations seem to fall into the great stagnation. Furthermore, if there are no religious givens or necessities which would compel us to look beyond wealth in order to please God or the like, a God who could also help us face the Lacanian real we might glimpse, then this contributes to us seeming to only have materiality by which to orient our eyes. And what we seem to see in first world nations is wealth. Where the category of non-rationality is missing, it would be irrational for us not to keep our eyes on that, and so we keep our eyes on what brings us affliction. We give our attention to what takes it away. But how do we keep attention? Well, based on everything we've said, everything which is visible in the world is precisely what can lead us to affliction. So ultimately, we must keep our eyes on the unseen, to allude to Paul. And what is something which can always and unconditionally prove to be invisible? Lack, mystery, the apathetic. Such is what we must orbit around to assure that attention, AB, does not fall into affliction, AA. But taking this seriously would require us to profoundly change how we live our lives and approach reality. We must make paradox and Hegel's contradiction central after centuries of habituating ourselves to making equivalence and non-contradiction central. The profundity of the change required to spread childhood cannot be overstated. Due to the loss of givens and gradual loss of the plausible deniability that an ultimate ground is possible, increasingly more and more people find themselves reacting to existential anxiety in a way that tends to either be fascist or isolationist. We are all increasingly philosophical and existential, and in the midst of this transformation, the social ends up sacrificed. For as Donald Livingston taught us in light of Hume, there cannot be a community of philosophers each instigating his own heroic act of total transcendence. There are random children here and there, but this doesn't help our situation. We need a milieu of children, which means we need to spread childhood. To quote Dr. Livingston again, as also discussed in The Absolute Choice, and by milieu, I have Dave at Theory Underground in mind. But to quote Livingston, the discovery that philosophy is inconsistent with itself and with the critical thinking which achieves the reform that renders philosophy self-coherent is expressed by Hume in a dialectical circle of thought. Philosophers who have passed through this disturbing circle, emphasis added, of philosophical self-understanding, Hume calls true philosophers. Those who have not reached the level of self-awareness in which philosophical reflection itself is seen as a problem, and so have not themselves instigated the dialectical circle, are false philosophers. To spread childhood is to spread true philosophy, which is a philosophy that moves through being, essence, and concept, to allude to Hegel. Hume is a friend in this effort, who defended a science of man as foundational, which is a defense of attention over reflection. But this is hard to stay true to, precisely because reality has given us a mixed kind of life, which is why it is so difficult to indulge our passion for science, yet let our science be human. Even if we engage in philosophy, there is no guarantee we will afford affliction in favor of attention, avoid affliction. As Hume understood, for he suggested we should be rightly punished if we fail to bring our philosophical reflection to the realm of common life. Profound research I prohibit and will severely punish by the pensive melancholy which they introduce. And that's from the introduction to his great treatise. Philosophical melancholia is what awaits those who engage in philosophy separate from common life, and this is what is spreading around the world with the loss of givens, global affliction, we might say. Under the affliction and discourse, under this affliction and discourse, and again by discourse we're referring to Kafka, since truth organizes values, what we do that we believe is practical, wise, moral, enriching, are all suspect and easily corrupted. If we make a plan for that, for all practical purposes, is a good plan, we may, for good reason, simply end up deeper in affliction, at which point we will easily become increasingly fragile, and yet sure we are anti-fragile, to allude to Nassim Taleb. And it's wonderful to see you, Mills. Thank you for being here. And yes, I think that's a good association, process versus method. Very nice. Makes me think of a firebend who I come to regularly. And then when the unexpected occurs, we'll be broken. It'll be too late. And because of affliction, we might not even realize we were in a trap. The worst traps are those that, even when they are sprung, we don't realize we fell into. For those are the traps people after us can walk right into. To this point, in the parallaxed view number 105, Andrew Sweeney and Tom Amargo discussed how there could be a life drive just as much as a death drive, a point which suggests necentropy versus entropy, as Cadell last discusses. And given the trouble with affliction and rational impasses, we might say that neurotypical thinking might be a self-effacement drive, while engaging in neurodiverse thinking is a creative drive or menti-divergent. If we are not intentional about neurodiversity, AB, we naturally slip into living according to a self-effacement drive, AA, which is to say we slip into rational impasses without realizing it, or ever realizing it. We tend to assume that in the end, we will receive a final revelation in which everything will be clear, but at least in this life, this is not so. But this belief can still remove from us incentive to check ourselves to see if we slip into affliction. After all, why go through all that trouble and try to spread childhood if in the end we'll know the truth to be dragged out of Plato's cave? Indeed, would affliction let us think otherwise? And that is the end of section 2A of chapter 3 of book 1. For more from Belonging Again II.1, please check out the playlist on YouTube. You can also find the book on Amazon. All purchases and reviews are deeply appreciated. And thank you so much for your time. All the best. And Mills, thank you for coming by. Appreciate it. All the best. All the best.